Pleased to be joined now by senior producer from NFL Films and also co-host of ESPN's NFL Matchup Show, Greg Cosell, joining us, whose weekly segment is presented by Scott Lawnyard, an official commercial site work partner of the Buffalo Bills. All right, Greg, not a super sexy divisional matchup that the league schedule makers probably thought it would be in Week 17 at the beginning of the season or when they put the schedule together in May, but here we are, and there is something on the line for the Bills this week. They need to win to nail down the 2 seed, so I would anticipate we're going to get the full complement of effort from the Bills to try to just put this thing to bed and give their team a pseudo-bye next week.
Brownie, I need to tell you, since you do the games, and I assume you talk to people, what the heck's going on with this defense? I mean, all of a sudden, I'm seeing cover one and pressure. Where'd all this come from? Because that's what they did last week against the Patriots. That's not what they normally do. I mean, was that specific to the Patriots, or are we seeing a little bit of a sea change?
I think we're seeing. I think that was specific to the Patriots and the fact that the Bills needed to win one game down the stretch, or a couple of games down the stretch to get the 2 seed. I think their game plan was affected by the fact that they're counting on being able to win one of their next 2 games and get the 2 seed, and they don't want to show anything down the stretch.
I also think, Greg, that there was an element of communication issues in the zone defense calls with 4 backup players in starting roles in the back 7, and I think they had to resort to more man-to-man calls, which requires, as you know, less communication, and they just had to try their hand at that to get more sound execution with so many backup players playing on the back end.
That's a great point. And given who they were playing against, because there's not really a big-time receiver on the Patriots that you have to worry about, the way you worry about others, let's say, then that makes sense. That's a good point, Brownie. But, yeah, that was one of the first things I noticed. I'm watching that tape, and I'm going, whoa, there's pressure, there's man coverage. This is not normally what I see from the Bills' defense.
Right, and it is part of the reason that, some players like Kyer Elam have trouble getting on the field and playing meaningful snaps. His strength is man coverage, and then in zone coverage, he, along with a rookie safety trying to communicate to him and Cole Bishop, along with Cam Lewis, who's kind of a Swiss Army knife player playing safety as well. I think they felt the connectivity of that group was compromised to some degree in zone coverage, so they went more man.
That's very valid, and now that you've said it, that makes absolute perfect sense. And so we'll see. Should Douglas be back this week?
Looks like Douglas is back this week, as well as Milano, and Hamlin, Cam Lewis, Taylor Rapp, all questionable for Sunday's game. I would imagine that at least one of those 3 will be back. Maybe more. We'll see. They've all been practicing.
Let me ask you a question then. If by chance things were to take a turn for the worse and none of them could play, who would play safety with Bishop?
It would probably be Kareem Jackson, who was the practice squad elevation the last 2 games.
Right.
Yeah, he was out there, and he was active the last couple of games. So, it's a mash unit in the back end, and I think there is something to the fact, Josh alluded to it offensively at least, that they were trying to beat the Patriots a little bit left-handed.
I did. And that stood out, by the way. That stood out to me. It was not a really good offensive performance, but I think they probably, I'm not saying they wanted it not to be a good one, but I think they probably had a sense that they could win the game without a great, without showing some cool stuff that they've shown, more of in recent weeks.
Yeah, I think they were going to try and lean on the fact that they had better personnel, and think that would outdistance the Patriots over 4 quarters. They didn't give them much help with concepts.
Not to mention the fact that they play him in 2 weeks anyway. Again.
Well, it's a good thing they were able to pull that one out. But your point, Brownie, about the and the safety position is interesting. But Steve, I mean, where's Mark Kelso when you need him?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. You need just somebody, right?
That's right.
Listen, we're getting calls. We've gotten calls today, and our listeners will know we've gotten calls today about Micah Hyde's on the practice squad. People are clamoring for some stability back there because there's just guys back there they don't know.
Sure. No, and that's why Brownie's point's such a good one because, it's funny you mentioned that, Brownie, because when I watch college tape and see, corners and safeties, that's one of the things I really try to get a feel for is just how they read routes, how they react in the back end when they're playing zone. Because particularly with corners, you can see guys play press or play man. That's an easier thing to evaluate. But the tougher thing to really get a feel for, and is so important, obviously, in the NFL with so many sort of hybrid coverages and zone mans and zone match and all that, is how guys play zone coverage. That's hard.
Yeah, and the task becomes more trying this week with Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams, and it appears if the Jets have one thing going for them in the passing game, it's the connection between Rodgers and Adams. He's now got 7 touchdowns in 8 games with the Jets.
Yeah. No, and it's clear that he's sort of, rebuilt that connection now that Adams has been there for quite some time. Whereas the Rodgers-Wilson connection is not really there, or it doesn't appear to be on tape. We're not there, so I don't know what it's like, day to day. But just watching the games, it's certainly not the same connection as Rodgers to Adams.
Well, I was saying this earlier. I think one of the things that there's not many holes to poke in Rodgers' career, but I don't know whether it's inability or he never got a chance to prove that he could do it with a bunch of wide receivers or guys. He always had a guy like a Jordy Nelson or a Davante Adams or one of those guys, and certainly notoriously in Green Bay, he never had the first-round wide receiver, but he still had some pretty good guys. But wherever, and now when he was even when he was in Green Bay, and even when he had just moved to New York, he wanted guys he chose as wide receivers. He never really trusted anybody else to pick his wide receiving core.
Well, it's funny you say that because I remember a coach telling me, and this relates to Aaron Rodgers, but he was talking about Peyton Manning, but it's the same thing, telling me that when you get, Peyton Manning late in his career, like when he went to Denver, and Aaron Rodgers now with the Jets, is you're not running your offense, you're running their offense.
Right.
And you're running what they feel comfortable with and who they want to throw it to. And I'm sure that's the case with Aaron Rodgers. You want him to be as comfortable as possible. And my sense is throughout early part of this season, and even there are times even more recently watching the tape, that I just don't feel like he's an overly comfortable player. He misses throws with poor ball location that we've never seen him miss in his career, because that was an absolute strength of his game. His just precise ball placement was off the charts. It's one of the things that made him so special all through the years. There are many things that made him special, obviously, and that's why he'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But, it just seems that to me, guys, he's missed some throws that I just, I'm surprised that he misses. He hasn't, that's not something we're used to seeing.
Let me ask you this, and this is something that maybe goes a little deeper. I know this. When you get to a point where you're Aaron Rodgers, like Peyton Manning when he was in Denver, John Elway suffered from this, Jim Kelly did, all the great quarterbacks at the end of their career or towards the end of their career, one problem is all of us compare the guy to himself.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Compare Aaron Rodgers to the rest of the quarterbacks in the AFC. Is he still there? I mean, is he still a viable starter? Is he, do you think he's made a point of it. He's going to play 17 games this year. He's out there. He's available. How good is he compared to the other guy? Not to Aaron Rodgers when he was a two-time MVP. Compare him to the rest of the guys.
I would say he's still far more than a viable starter, Steve. I mean, I think when you talk about the best quarterbacks in the AFC, you're probably not mentioning his name in the top. Yeah, well, certainly you got Josh, you got Mahomes, you got Burrow, you got Lamar. I don't think you'd put him in that category right now, but you'd certainly put him at the next group. And again, I can't think of every guy, and I may have left someone out, so I don't want anybody to get upset. But I don't think he's quite that guy anymore. But he's still, look, there's no question he could come out this week, and depending on how things play out, could he go 25 for 37 and throw for 340? He absolutely could. You can't assume that this guy can't make throws. It just hasn't been exactly the same. And your point's a great one, Steve. I mean, I was comparing Aaron Rodgers to Aaron Rodgers, just because I've watched tape for so many years, and obviously there was a stretch there for a long time where it just seemed like he never missed a throw.
Yeah.
Right.
And then taking an overarching look at the offense, Greg, how would you say everything comes back to the offensive line and all the troubles of that group staying healthy? Because
Yes.
they have never demonstrated an ability to run the ball with any sense
Yep.
of production. They're 31st in the league, and Aaron has not looked like Aaron because protection has been an issue for good portions of the season. Where would you say this line state is right now with all the players on IR and even with Fashanu going on IR this week?
Yeah, I think that's been a big issue, and I was going to bring that up, and you just did. I think their O-line has been a significant disappointment this year. They thought they really upgraded it in the offseason by signing Tyron Smith, who unfortunately has been hurt again. They thought that they were upgrading it at the guard position by signing
John Simpson.
right?
Yeah.
And it just hasn't worked out. It hasn't been as good a group as I'm sure they thought. They've not been able to generate any consistent run game, which I'm sure they believed going into the season would be the foundation of their offense with a 40-year-old quarterback who obviously can still throw it really, really well, but you probably didn't want to be in a position where you had to ask him to drop back 40 plus times a game. And they've just not been able to develop a run game. The left tackle position, they did not want Fashanu to be playing left tackle this year, really, when all's said and done. And now they're into their third left tackle, Max Mitchell, I assume. He came in for Fashanu. I assume he'll be the starter at left tackle this week. He's not really a left tackle by NFL standards. So, their O-line has been a bit, I don't want to say a bit of a disappointment. You could argue it's been the biggest disappointment in their offense.
Let's talk about their offense. Where is it right now? And in the big picture, what will they expect to be able to get done against the Bills defense that struggled on third down and really has thrived on turnovers?
I mean, I think they'll expect to play the way that they hope to play. They're not going to come out and ask Aaron Rodgers to drop back 45 times. They're still going to try to run the ball. Look, the two backs, Breece Hall is a high-level talent for a back. I mean, I know the numbers might not suggest that, but if you just look at sheer talent, given his size, his movement, his pass-catching ability, if he was on a team, I don't think he's as good as Bijan Robinson, but I think if he was on the Falcons, we'd be talking about him as a really good back. And even Braylon Allen. I did not love Braylon Allen coming out, but he's a very good number 2 back, with Hall being a number 1. So I think they're still going to try to play the way they have to play because I don't know if they can protect well enough. And look, I'm being honest, and you guys know that I watched the tape. I don't think the Bills' pass rush overall this season has been as good as we were hoping it would be with their just a 4-man D line. Although I got to admit, I thought that Miller had some really good pass rushes this past week.
Yeah.
But anyway, overall, I don't think it's been as good as we had all hoped. But still, they can't come out, in a throw ball game. Where is this game, by the way? Is this in New York?
No, it's
in Buffalo.
Buffalo, because I know down in this area, it's probably up through New York, we're supposed to get like rain for the next 4 days.
Yeah, 50 degrees and rain.
Oh, so it's not going to be cold, but it's going to rain. Yeah. So again, I don't know, I don't know what that means as far as game plan for either team. But yeah, they're going to play, Steve, to me, the way they have to play in order to be successful on offense. Otherwise, Aaron Rodgers, even with the Bills' pass rush not being exactly what we hoped, I think he'd be under too much duress.
And then with their defensive side of the ball, Quinnen Williams is nicked up. Doesn't look like Sauce Gardner's going to play after suffering a hamstring injury last week. Where is this group? I mean, C.J. Mosley was kind of their emotional leader. He's on injured reserve with another long-term injury. I know that, they're kind of middle of the pack when they really shouldn't be when you look at their talent. What has kind of happened there? Is it because of a lack of support from the offensive side of the ball and they're forced to carry the mantle again, much like they did last year with Zach Wilson?
Yeah, it's funny because I still think their defensive front, including their 2 linebackers, Sherwood, who I think's actually had a very, very good year, and he was obviously not penciled in as a starter when the season started with Mosley, certainly not in their nickel. I think Sherwood and Quincy Williams are a good linebacking duo. They're both athletic kids. Sherwood was a safety in college. Quincy Williams is a pretty explosive athlete. They still have a pretty good front, even if Quinnen Williams does not play. I think their front's still pretty good. Will McDonald's had a really good second season. They've got some nice players. So, I think the back end and even Sauce Gardner, and I know he's been in and out of the lineup this year. I don't think he's had a great year. And I think their back end has kind of let them down a little bit. They've had injuries at safety. They've had to play a lot of different people. So to me, it's been the back end, and I don't know what their exact numbers are, versus pass. But just watching their tape, I mean, look, they're playing Oliver at slot corner. Oliver couldn't cut it with the 49ers as a slot corner, and they released him. So they're playing some guys that they did not anticipate playing, and I think it's hurt them throughout the course of the season.
How does Sauce Gardner's absence change things for the Jets, particularly against an offense like Buffalo's, where you got 1 week you got Amari Cooper getting 14 targets, the next week you got Keon Coleman getting 12 targets, and then you got Shakir getting 10 targets a different week. The Bills have this committee type of wideout room, and without Sauce, it might make it even a little easier for them to call this defensive game plan against the Bills because they don't have that top corner out there. How does this change the mix of that DB versus wide receiver on the Bills' offense, Jet defense?
I would think, Steve, not a lot, because contrary to what people think, Gardner's not a matchup corner. Gardner's a left corner and Reed's the right corner. Very rarely in Gardner's career is he matched up to wide receivers. He doesn't do that. That's not the way they play. So now they play Eccles at left corner, a guy who's been there for years, and he's played both outside and in the slot. I mean, he's an NFL corner. You can line up and play with Eccles. He's not a great player, but you can line up and play with him. So he'll play left corner. Reed will play right corner. Oliver will be in the slot. So again, I don't know how the Bills see that in terms of what they want to do formationally, but there's not a matchup corner situation here, even if Gardner played.
All right, and then we get to I know you don't watch special teams, but their kicking game, Greg, has been a mess. I mean, they've had 3 kickers. Now Jeff Ulbrich, the interim coach today, said it'll be Zerline again, and this is a guy that clanged 2 off the upright back in Week 6 in a 3-point loss. And he's back in the lineup off IR.
Yeah, again, I don't want, I'm not studying that, but when for teams that ultimately are struggling, in particular areas, then special teams becomes a bigger factor because you just don't want your special teams to screw up, and their special teams, unfortunately, have done that. But look, the concern you have, just getting back to their offense, the concern you always have when you play an Aaron Rodgers is he's still Aaron Rodgers, and he can be great any given week. And you just can't go in assuming, well, gee, their offense has struggled, their O-line isn't really that good or has not been that good, and therefore it's, they're probably not going to score a lot. You never know that. I mean, keep in mind, even though there's not been a great connection with Rodgers and Wilson, you could argue with Adams and Wilson, they've got 2 of the top 10, 12 receivers in the league. I mean, Adams, most people thought, I talked to coaches this off season, previous to this summer, and Adams was viewed by everybody as a top 5 receiver in the league. So, I know his numbers because of his situation in Oakland and now with the Jets, Las Vegas and not with the Jets, and now with the Jets, as such that he may not get 1,000 yards. I don't know, but you're dealing with 2 high level receivers. Yeah. They can make plays, and Rodgers can still throw it.
How many reasons are there for the Bills' struggles defensively on 3rd down?
Well, this is just my view of tape. Again, I don't know how things are coached. I don't know how they see it. I think they've struggled to get the pressure they hoped with 4, and they've been a predominant zone team, and I think they've struggled a bit with their communication on the back end. So I think there's been too many holes and voids. Every zone, Steve, as you well know, has voids. I mean, otherwise everybody would play the same zone. So I think they've struggled with that. And when you combine that with the fact that the pass rush hasn't been quite what we hoped, I think that those 2 things really stand out, to me, on tape anyway.
Good Greg, stuff. Thanks as always. Appreciate it. We'll catch up with you next week. Happy New Year to you.
Hey, same to you guys. Appreciate it.